my moonlighting job is doing some media, which has been fast and furious these days. On that note, I want to just preface this in terms of timing, and I'm going to apologize for this. I have ESPN responsibilities that I said, no way, I can't right now. They're having the Vikings press conference, but I can't cover that now. But I do have to be back at a studio a little after 1. So I am going to be with you, with Mike, until 12:25, 12:30. And then I'm going to leave it to Mike Sielski, our special guest, to take questions from 12:30 to close to 1. And if questions are just fast and furious towards the end, I will impose upon Mike to go up to 3:02 for my class time and continue to answer questions. And of course, I will be back when I can from the studio, and we will reschedule some more stuff on this stuff. Because I think we are at a watershed time in sports. This is a moment of time, and I thought it very important to sit and discuss this in front of you and with someone that I respect in the media that I've noticed in my readings the past few weeks that, wow, that is a great perspective. And people have been kind enough to me to say, I offer a nice perspective, now you have another perspective. So we're going to get in to talk about it. And I guess, first of all, from the Philadelphia Inquirer, formerly the Wall Street Journal, one of the most respected writers in the country, welcome Mike Sielski.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm a LaSalle University alumnus. Please don't hold that against me. On Explorers.
I don't know exactly where to start, whether it's Ray Rice, whether it's Adrian Peterson, whether it's other issues. I think what we can start with maybe is, do we have a credibility, do we have a league in crisis? The NFL is by far the most popular sport in the country, maybe the most successful sports venture in the history of the world. Over $9 billion of annual revenues, Sunday staple of living for this country, fantasy football, 25 million people. Where are we? Is this a moment in time where we look at and say it all changed? September 2014, we look back in 20 years, it all changed. And what is the it? Is the it just conduct? Or is the it sort of a feeling about the sport and the players and the owners and the commissioner that we don't trust this anymore? Something's gone wrong here. And we as consumers, and those of you in my class, know the most important thing a commissioner, a league can have is integrity, public trust, public confidence, a feeling from the public like, this is a cool thing. We're going to invest our time. We're going to take our kids. We're going to spend 3 hours of our time on this. You know how many entertainment options are out there? The devices? But we have a sport right now that people do that. The NFL is big, big time. People invest their hard-earned dollars, time, family time. Is that a question right now? And this whole thing happened. And now I'm going to go to Mike, because I think it all started. Because here we are, ESPN, Wall Street Journal, Philadelphia Inquirer, Sports Illustrated. Well, it started because of TMZ, a video. Visual evidence is something that was so shocking and so galling and so appalling to the public that the reaction is, oh my God, what's going on here? Ray Rice got 2 games for that? Then it's domestic violence. Then it's new domestic violence penalties. Then it's, oh my God, Ray Rice, what's he still doing on the team? Then he's cut. Then he's indefinitely suspended. Then what about this guy in Carolina, Hardy? He beat up a girlfriend. What about the guy in San Francisco? He beat up a girlfriend. Then Adrian Peterson's beating up kids. So we're at a moment in time. What the hell's going on? And I think we should just address it. So Mike, what the hell's going on? I guess let's start with you here, because one thing you wrote about TMZ and about their relationship or lack thereof with the NFL, I'm very sensitive to that. I'll let you address it.
Sure. Well, I think the perspective that you and I can bring merely by being older than just about everybody in this room, not everybody, but just about everybody, is that there was once a time where there was something of a media monopoly in this country, where if you woke up in the morning, you got your news by reading the morning paper or the morning coffee and listening to Walter Cronkite at 6 or 6:30 at night on CBS. And that was it. There was no 24-hour news cycle. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. There was no any of that stuff. There was no 24-hour cable news, no ESPN, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all that stuff. So the environment that you guys are have grown up in and are growing up in is far different from the one that Andrew and I did. So what's happened, I think, now is that in that 24-hour cycle, in that really almost second by second, hour by hour cycle, the push to get any information, any sort of news, has become so fierce that you end up in a lot of situations kind of compromising the sort of principles and values and things that, to kind of take you guys away from where you are in my world, what journalism is supposed to be based on. So what you end up having happen is you have these major sports cable network like ESPN, which pays billions of dollars to own the rights to broadcast Monday Night Football and has dozens of former players, former executives, former agents and executives, and that I don't mean to lump Andrew into what I'm about to talk about, covering the league. Well, what happens in that situation? When you have a monopoly of news, when you can only go to certain places to find out what's going on in the world, it's easy to distinguish, what to cover. You feel like you have this responsibility. We're the Philadelphia Inquirer. We have this responsibility to tell people what they need to know. Well, now you have websites. You have ESPN. You have newspapers. You have blogs. You have all these things. And so the definition of, we're all trying to find out, okay, what is it that people need, but more importantly, what do they want? What do they care about? The idea of making money on content, which really wasn't an issue 20, 30 years ago, is a primary issue in the media now. Do my columns on Philly.com and Inquirer.com get enough hits to justify the idea that the company I work for can then sell advertising for it? So all of that is kind of a precursor to saying that what we have now is we have these TV networks and in a lot of cases reporters covering the NFL in a way where they're trying to find out what do people want. And as it turns out, what a lot of people want are what guys like Adam Schefter of ESPN and Peter King of Sports Illustrated give people, which is this kind of moment-by-moment minutia of what's going on with this story or this team. And to get that information, you have to forge relationships with the people in the league you cover. Sometimes what happens in those situations is that you get really close, if not too close, to the people you cover. And you almost, in my mind, become a de facto employee of the league. You're less an independent outsider saying this is important or this needs to be covered and people need to know this, than you are somebody who's kind of bartering and trading information as if you were another executive in the league or a general manager in the league. I would encourage you guys, if you haven't already done so, there was a terrific piece in the Washington Post a few weeks ago. There was a profile of Adam Schefter, and it went into great detail about how he gets the information he gets to pass along to the viewers and Twitter followers that he has. And it's not as if he's a reporter. It's as if he's kind of a good faith negotiator between the general manager of this team and the general manager of that team. So when you have that kind of relationship with the people you're supposed to be covering, the idea that something as damaging as this Ray Rice video that shows him socking the woman who's going to be his wife in the face with a single punch and knocking her unconscious, the idea that you're going to be the one to obtain that video before anybody else, based on the relationships that you have with the people you cover, is just, I think it's kind of ridiculous on its face. Now, the other dimension of that is that TMZ is generally a gossip-driven website that in many cases pays for information, and almost certainly did that in this case. But in today's media landscape, where there aren't a lot of rules anymore, is that necessarily, can you necessarily frown upon it? I guess. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that when I saw TMZ got the Ray Rice video, I was not surprised at all, because they have set themselves up as kind of the counterbalance to what Schefter and King and Jake Glazer and Jason LaConfort at CBS are going to be. In a way, it's not their jobs. Even though they're the guys that we turn to for all our information about the NFL, it's not really their job, in a way, to get that video. And you wonder if it ought to be. I guess it's a question that we get.
Yeah, I mean, with sports media, this is a sports media issue.
Right.
It's a sports business issue, and it's
Well,
a
yeah.
sports law issue. You know, on the law side, I've had all these New Jersey state attorneys, New Jersey former attorney generals tell me, oh my God, there's no way you could send that evidence. You can't just walk in and see that evidence. And that's kind of the way maybe standard media looks at that.
Right.
Of course you can't see that. That's in the hands of the Attorney General. That's in the hands of the investigation. But TMZ didn't care about that.
Exactly.
I mean, if someone sent that to the NFL and they had possession of it, there's obviously an incentive for them to do that. And if it, as reported by the AP, it was sent by a law enforcement official, sure, they could get in a ton of trouble for doing that, lose their job, and I don't know if there'd be legal sanctions or not. But they obviously made a risk-reward determination. The person that alleged, again, it's all alleged, we're going to have an independent investigation. But if that person sent that video to the NFL, it would be illegal, it would be immoral, it would be everything against their job. But the risk-reward is, I'm getting enough money, I'm getting enough something to do this. That I understand the risk is losing my job, or whatever sanction I would get. And if the woman who received, who allegedly received it at the NFL, didn't bring it to a supervisor, same thing. There's evidently some risk-reward there that, hey, you say you got this at some point, and there'll be this in it for you. And it goes back to Mike's point. We're in a changing environment with the media. And I guess that brings me to the question is, and I'll answer this from my perspective, did this misbehavior, this bad behavior from players, it's obviously not new. It's obviously not new. And I was with the Packers many years. Even that time, we kind of learned about guys with misbehavior kind of through back channels, never got out. Never. Not to local media, not to national media, and there was no social media. So let's go with that. So now the behavior is being exposed. That was never brought out to light before. I don't know if there's a question here. Good thing, bad thing. What, as a media member writing about it, do you want to know all this stuff? Do you feel an obligation to the public to let them know?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Number one, you want to let the public know of things that you think they need to know so they can make good choices about their lives, about the sports that they care about, their local communities, whatever the case may be. I think we also, for ego's sake, you want to break news and you want to write something that's compelling, or you want to break a story that gets you attention, and all those sorts of things. I mean, you know, it's very easy for us in the media to get very highfalutin about what we do. But the fact of the matter is, we like the attention too. And, you know, it's easier now, I think, than ever before to break news and then find out after the fact, well, wait a minute, that's not exactly the whole story, or that's not exactly what happened. And that gets into a whole other realm of who do you work for and what is the vetting process like for producing news or a story or things like that. I mean, I can speak from experience at the Wall Street Journal. When I worked on a story, if there was anything remotely negative, a negative comment, a negative fact that I happened to uncover about a given individual, let's say I was profiling Andrew, and I uncovered that he had, again, you know, he had an arrest for drunk driving when he was 22 years old, okay? I couldn't just write that and have it end up in the paper. I would have to call Andrew as part of my reporting and say, I have this. What is your response to this? That was a Wall Street Journal policy, and until I did that, my story would never see the light of that. not everybody, not every media entity acts that way. And I think there's a risk, to get back to kind of your original question about what is the bigger issue here? Is it that these acts are taking place, or is it kind of the NFL's response to it, and what does it say about how we take in information from our sports league? I think it's the latter, in the sense that let me say this first. It's very easy for us in the media to turn stories like Ray Rice or Adrian Peterson into something they're not, in the rush to kind of create a crisis where perhaps one doesn't exist. It's very easy to stand back and say, the NFL has a domestic violence problem, just look at Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson. It takes a more responsible and more thorough reporter or media member to then say, okay, wait a minute. Let's take a look at exactly how many players have been arrested on domestic violence charges over the last 20 to 30 years. And let's track that against society at large. And then let's ask, okay, is what's happening in the NFL really out of line with what's happening in society at large? And I believe 538, website 538, crunched the numbers on this, and it turns out that that's actually not the case, that the actual number of domestic violence arrests that happen among NFL players tracks very closely to society at large. Okay? So we have to be very careful about how we present that sort of information, or we present these sort of cases. It's very easy to jump to the conclusion there's a crisis in the NFL with respect to domestic violence cases. I think where there is a crisis, again, to get back to your original question, is how they're handled. The reason that this is still an ongoing story is how the league has handled it. Initially, the 2-game suspension for Rice, when everybody already knew, per the police report of the incident in the Atlantic City casino, that he had rendered his wife unconscious somehow, either by, I believe the police report said a punch. But he had knocked her out. Everybody already knew that, and so there was this initial wave of outrage about he only got 2 games. Then people saw the video, and there's this subsequent wave, I would say tidal wave of outrage over, you had the opportunity to see this, and you did not act more than to suspend him 2 games. Then you have the commissioner going on CBS, which is a network that has deep and expensive and valuable financial ties to the league, and presenting more information and presenting a perspective that raised even more questions. And not since opening himself up to questions from media who are a little bit more independent and who might present him with a challenge that he might not want to face. So there's all sorts of issues, both legal and journalistic and media related, kind of floating around.
Yeah, and so many times I'm asking myself, why all this? And I'll give my little spin here before, unfortunately, I have to go. But on the Rice thing, I continue to ask, and my class knows this, I ask, why? Why is the commissioner risking his reputation on Ray Rice? What is it about Ray Rice where the commissioner, the most powerful man in sports, would go so light? And I continue to question that, and I sort of look at the history of it, and one thing just really stands out to me. Life and business is about relationships and human capital and human politics. Ray Rice had a disciplinary hearing on June 16th at the NFL. It was attended by him, his wife, his attorneys, Roger Goodell and his attorney, and the president of the Baltimore Ravens and the general manager of the Baltimore Ravens, Dick Cass and Ozzie Newsome. To me, now it's sort of, things are becoming a little clearer. Like, wait a minute. I was in the NFL 9 years. I never would dream of accompanying a player to a disciplinary meeting with the commissioner. Yet the Ravens sent their 2 top executives to it. That is an investment from the owner, like, hey, this kid is really important to us. Really important to us. I think that mattered. I really think it mattered. And then we can have a whole discussion for another day about why, well, should it matter? Shouldn't Ray Rice be disciplined along with everyone else? And this brings me to that other point about due process. I think teams hide under due process. I think due process is great, but due process is for stars. Due process is not for the average player. If his name was Ray Jones, you think he would have gotten 2 games? He would have been an ex-player. getting cut. Adrian Peterson, if he was a backup player, we wouldn't be talking about him. He'd be long gone. He'd be in the wind. On the Vikings situation, which just materialized at 5:30 in the morning today, here's my take. You have a player that's toxic, signature player of the franchise, absolute most important player. You think of Minnesota Vikings, first thing you think of, that's it. For 10 years. He's got a lot of problems right now. He's become toxic to the Vikings. Sponsors are pulling out. Not national, local to the Vikings. Radisson has the banner. They don't want any part of it. You have the governor wing. Public funding of a stadium. All this is going on in Minnesota. And you got the league. So here's the bargaining that I think went on overnight. The league said, we got to park this guy. He can't play. He can't play. Can't have him on the field. Cannot. The Vikings said, well, okay, but he is our best player. The agents, powerful agency, CAA, most powerful agency in sports, they're like, well, what do you mean? Well, he's got to get paid $690,000 a week. He'll be paid, right? A deal was made. So Adrian goes on this list, commissioner exempt list, never heard of it. Never heard of it. I've been around the league 20 years, never heard of it. Number 2, he gets paid. Number 3, the Vikings sponsors hopefully are chill, come back. All right. It's put on hold. The whole situation, everybody gets their piece. What do the Vikings get? They get the sponsors and the governor off their back. What does the league get? They got this new category for him. What does Adrian get? Paid. Paid vacation. That's how things work. We've got a deal made. It's unfortunate that these deals are made with domestic violence in the background. But I think we have to be real here. This is a business. This is a legal situation that they handle the way they did.
And meanwhile, you also had today the NFL Players Association announced that it would appeal Ray Rice's suspension. Because what happened in that situation? Initially, Rice went through the process, with the commissioner, as Andrew described. He gets 2 games. The NFL, because of the outrage over the meekness of that suspension, then establishes a policy on the fly that all domestic violence cases will get what? 6 games. Then the video comes out, and what does the league do? It goes for a second bite at the apple at Ray Rice and says, now you're suspended indefinitely. Well, that's when the players' union goes, whoa, we had a deal here. We had a deal. Number 1, you had your chance to suspend it indefinitely. You suspended him for 2 games. Number 2, you then established a policy that set up a new baseline. And now apparently that baseline doesn't matter. So where is this going to go from here? I mean, it's incredible on so many levels, and its tentacles reach into so many different areas of life and sports and media and all that stuff. It's incredible.
And I'm going to run and leave you to Mike, but I think the thing that we have to look at is this a moment in time, and just think about this, or is it just a wave? The NFL has survived, for the moment, the concussion issue. The NFL has survived Richie Incognito emotionally bullying his teammate and creating a firestorm in Miami. The NFL has survived countless momentary crises. Will it survive this? That's what we need to find out. We need to see what Carolina's going to do, what San Francisco is going to do, and who knows what else. I just saw a tweet as I walked in. Gloria Allred, there will be lawyers. She's got 2 women doing a press conference in Atlanta today about a well-known NFL player that beat him up. So stay tuned. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much. Here's Mike.
Is it filming in the back? Is it okay if I stand up?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I sit around enough during the day. I don't want to talk about you guys. I taught writing and journalism at South for a few years, and I hated, as a college student and a graduate student, I hated lecturers just standing up there and talking at me. So Andrew and I covered a lot there. So what I'd like to do is kind of open the floor up to you guys and wherever you'd like to take this. On the law end of things, I can give you my amateur take on things. I can certainly speak to these stories and other aspects of sports from a media perspective. But like I said, I want to kind of leave that up to wherever you guys would like to take this. So throw up your hand and I'll answer your question or consider your point or spit in your face. Yeah.
Where do you think this would have been different if the league had suspended Rice for 6 or 8 games initially, and the video came out after that fact before they changed policy? Would this have been a whole different storyline if they had suspended him regularly?
I think so. I think the fact that it was 2 games is really the genesis of all this. People forget, people forget now as a matter of proportion how much outrage there was initially at that 2-game suspension. Because everything that we really knew about what happened in that elevator was already public knowledge. CBS had gotten a hold of the police report. And so you could read, everybody could read for themselves that Rice had punched his wife per the police report and knocked her unconscious. And we had seen the video of him, if you remember, kind of dragging her out of the elevator. And I mean, I'm married. I suppose if God forbid my wife somehow drank too much and passed out in an elevator, I would have treated her with a little more love and respect than kind of dragging her by the feet and kind of kicking her feet out of the way so that when the elevator door closed, they wouldn't catch on her ankles. It was obvious what had happened. So the idea that he got 2 games initially, I think kind of got the water simmering a little bit. And then once the video came out, then they reached the border. Then it was, okay, what is going on here? It was bad enough that you gave this guy 2 games, particularly when, in kind of a moral hierarchy, per the league's collective bargaining agreement with the players' union, if a player is found to have used a performance-enhancing substance that's been banned by the league, he gets 4 games. He's suspended initially for 4 games. So think about that. In fact, for all you Eagles fans out there, just a little while before Rice's 2-game suspension came down, the Eagles have a right tackle named Lane Johnson. They're starting right tackle. He had been suspended for 4 games for using a performance-enhancing substance. And he went forward and said, this was a mistake, I didn't mean to do that, and it's the same thing that you hear every time a player who gets suspended for using a PED says. But if you take Johnson at his word, what you have now is a situation in which a commissioner has looked at this penalty, that he's collectively bargained with the players' union, that a player who puts something in his body so he can play on Sunday and entertain all these fans and help us make these billions of dollars that we're making. What he does, if he does that, it's twice as bad as another player socking his wife in the jaw and very nearly killing her. So there was outrage based on that, and I think you're right. I think it's a good question. I think if the commissioner off the bat had said 8-game suspension for Ray Rice, you're out half the season. Players union, come after me if you think that's too much, because what he did is so egregious that I'm going to suspend him for half a year or a year, or whatever. Then yes, the situation now would be completely different. Yeah.
How do you think it would have played out, or if it played out differently at all, if these played out at the club and at the league-wide level, if these players weren't superstars?
Well, I think the fact that they are changes everything. Because they're in the public eye, because they are so famous, because they make so much money. Yeah, I mean, people get suspended from their jobs all the time. If I had been pulled over for drunk driving on my way over here, and the Inquirer found out about it, I'd be suspended. A lot fewer people would be interested in that. If a guy who works for a noodle manufacturer gets pulled over for drunk driving, he might get suspended from his boss, from his place of work too, and nobody would know about it except his family.
What about them being, like superstars in the league? What if it was kind of a scrub who got, similar?
I think the severity of the action would change the dynamic. I think if this were a situation where a scrub player, so to speak, had been hitting his 4-year-old's legs and scrotum with a tree branch, there would have been some initial kind of, bust out my thesaurus here, kind of prurient interest in that. And people would have gone, oh my God, can you believe people still do that? And it would have passed because the Vikings would have cut him and the league would have suspended him, and that would have been that. But because it is Adrian Peterson, because he's AP, because he's the last back to rush for 2,000 yards in a season, because he came back from this terrible knee injury and was even better than before, and doesn't that show his character? That changes everything. And then, again, that takes us into a completely different realm about how guys like me cover these guys and how we assign qualities to them based on their performance on the field or within the arena of their sport that they might not necessarily possess.
ESPN's definitely profited from a lot of this in terms of being afforded a great deal of incendiary content. Yet they continue to hire people like would be then accused or convicted, such as Mike Tirico, Keyshawn Johnson, Ray Lewis, or CBS Shannon Sharp. Do they have an obligation to point the finger at themselves if they really care?
I would argue that they do. I mean, there's no law that says they have to. I would argue that they do. What's interesting, I don't know if you've noticed this, there was it was reported in the Sports Business Journal after the Ravens played the Steelers Thursday night. James Brown, who hosts kind of the roundtable and the CBS presentation of its NFL games, gave a monologue about domestic violence and was kind of universally lauded because he came out against domestic violence, which is kind of like coming out against kicking 3-legged puppies. I mean, there are harder stances to take than saying, pardon my language, don't beat the shit out of your wife, okay? But in today's society, that's considered courageous, I guess. And it's brave in a sense that he's doing this on CBS, which has these financial ties to the league. But what came out in the Sports Business Journal was that the head of CBS Sports, Sean McManus, had specifically told those former athletes and James Brown appearing on that panel, do not criticize any one particular individual who is affiliated with the league or the Ravens or the Players Union or anybody. So it's fine for James Brown to come out and say, domestic violence is bad and the NFL needs to do more about it. But per CBS's head of sports coverage, it wasn't fine for James Brown to say, Roger Goodell has messed this up. Ray Rice shouldn't be in the NFL. The Ravens messed this up. They shouldn't have sent their head coach, John Harbaugh, out to deal with the media. They should have had their owner, Steve Bisciotti, and their general manager, Ozzie Newsome, out there addressing this in the public. He wasn't allowed to say any of that. So, yeah, I mean, do I think these networks have a responsibility to be upfront about what they're doing and why they're doing it? Yeah. Does that mean they're going to? No. And I think in a lot of situations, I was discussing this the other day on a radio program, people have pointed to Keith Olbermann on ESPN and ESPN2 as being a very vocal critic of the league and of Goodell in particular. And that's fine and good. But it's really advantageous to ESPN to have him there saying those things, because it does provide kind of a convenient cover for them. If anybody goes to them and says, hey, you guys are shills for the NFL. Well, how can you say that we're shills for the NFL? We have Keith Olbermann over here. Keith, hit it! And Keith then talks about how terrible the NFL is and how terrible Ray Rice and Roger Goodell and all these things are. And meanwhile, don't notice what's going on behind the curtain over here with Adam Schefter reporting on inside information, Chris Mortensen and all that kind of stuff, and the hiring of guys like Ray Lewis and all the other people we mentioned. So it's really kind of complex and kind of seedy, in a way. Yeah, I'll get you next.
What kind of due diligence do you see teams taking in the future on drafting players? I mean, they go out and they want a product on the field, and kind of this background doesn't really matter at some point.
Well, I mean, they do a lot of due diligence anyway. I mean, they do, in fairness to NFL teams, they run background checks. They do everything they can to find out as much as they can about these players. And there are going to be situations where you find out everything you can, and it just turns out you misjudged the guy. I mean, that happens. Doesn't happen often, but it happens. The key question is, okay, you know all these things. Do we take him anyway? Do we get kind of the Father Flanagan complex where we say, if we get him in our culture, with our team, with our coach, with our support system, we'll be able to handle it? Or do you say, you know what? He's got a lot of problems. He's been arrested for this, that, and the other thing. Let's take Johnny Manziel, for instance. We know he has a problem with alcohol. You know, he's had issues, kind of on a lower scale compared to guys like Rice and Peterson. But then the question becomes, if we don't take him, and somebody else takes him after we do, and he kicks our butt every Sunday for 10 years, how are we going to explain that? And so decisions get made on that basis. Because winning matters, because ticket sales matter, because TV ratings matter, and it takes a strong bunch of decision makers to look at that in the face and say, okay, we're going to stick to our guns. You know, it's a challenging thing. It's interesting. I wrote a column a couple of days ago about Andrew Luck and Nick Foles, head of Monday Night Football game between the Eagles and the Colts. And the column dealt with the fact that ESPN, to its credit, did an extensive study last year about what goes into making a successful quarterback. Are there things that you can pinpoint when a kid is in college so that you have a really good chance of, if you pick that kid, he'll stay in the league for 10 years and be a very good player and all these sorts of things. And one of the things that they found was that a player's background mattered. That if a kid came from an upper middle class community that poured a lot of money into football at the high school level, and if he came from a two-parent background, regardless of his race, there was a really good chance that he was going to turn out to be a very good quarterback. That lessened the risk that he was going to be a bust if he drafted him. If you think about it, it makes sense. A guy like Robert Griffin III comes from that kind of background. Donovan McNabb came from that kind of background. Luck and Foles both came from that kind of background. So executives in the league are always looking for these kinds of ways to minimize risk. But at the same time, that question is always going to present itself. This guy is great on the field. He's not great off the field. What do we do about that? Can we help him? Can we fix him? Or is the risk too great? Sometimes you're going to miss, and in good faith. Sometimes you're going to be cynical about it and say, we don't care. We need a quarterback. We're going to take that guy and hope it works out. And often it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what your take is on the comment Andrew made before you had to leave about the NFL surviving Cognito, surviving the concussion scandal. Do you agree with that, or do you think that perhaps this is evidence that the NFL hasn't survived that, in that it seems to fit, right? It seems that Major League Baseball and basketball, every sport has their golf, auto racing, they all have their bad dudes. But it seems to stick here in a way in which it doesn't stick in Major League. It sticks differently in Major League Baseball than it does here, because it fits. It fits this narrative of a horribly violent game played by violent people who do violent things and suffer violent repercussions. It seems to fit that. So do you think that there's any sort of connection in people's minds that, yeah, this is all of one thing?
I think that connection is made in a lot of people's minds, not everyone's. And I think that that's the kind of the pressure point for what the league is facing. I don't think we're going to see the end of football, as it were, anytime in the next year to 10 years. But the idea that it would never happen because it's football and because we spend all our Sundays and Thursday nights and our Monday nights wrapped around this game doesn't mean that it can't happen down the road. Boxing had this tipping point. Again, you guys are probably all too young to remember this, but there was a time when boxing was the #1 sport in this country, when nothing galvanized the country and its sports viewing audience the way Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden did. Those times are gone, in large part because boxing reached its pressure point. There was the reality and the perception of corruption in the sport, that fights were fixed. that who's the real heavyweight champion. There was the damage done to fighters within the ring. The idea that, you know, for much of the viewing public, it became too much to watch two guys just beat each other up in the ring, no matter how often we called it the sweet science. And the landscape changed. You know, cable